Men must be free to do what they believe. It is not our right to punish one for thinking what they do, no matter how much we disagree. Hello, and welcome to Visions of the Past. This is an Assassin's Creed lore podcast, and my name is Andrew, and I'm grateful to see that you have found this podcast. Today, we're going to talk about the man who gave us that quote, Altaïr Ibn-La'Ahad. Altaïr has been in a number of games, including the game that started the series, Assassin's Creed, but also in the PSP game, Assassin's Creed Bloodlines, the Nintendo DS game, Assassin's Creed Altair's Chronicles, a cameo in Assassin's Creed 2, and a small part in Assassin's Creed Revelations. The book, Assassin's Creed The Secret Crusade by Oliver Bowden, was about his life, and he had a storyline in the Assassin's Creed Reflections comic. Before we get talking about what Altaïr did in his life, we need to talk a little bit about his real-world stats besides the games and stories that he has been in. Altaïr's facial likeness is modeled from Francisco Reyndes and is voiced by Philip Sabaz in Assassin's Creed and Kaz Anvar in Assassin's Creed Revelations. This change is explained well within the lore, with Altaïr's voice coming from the Animus 1.28 in Assassin's Creed and from the memory seals that was viewed through the Animus 2.03 in Revelations. According to Assassin's Creed game manual, Altaïr is 6 feet tall and weighs 170 pounds. The name Altaïr Ibn-La'Ahad is an interesting one. Altaïr is actually the brightest star in the constellation Aquila, and the star's name is an abbreviation from an Arabic phrase, and forgive me for the pronunciation, but it is An Ninsir al-Tayyar, which means the flying eagle. Ibn-La'Ahad is Arabic for son of no one. And what is most interesting about his last name is that during a mission in Assassin's Creed Revelations, the memory called Mentor's Keeper, he introduced himself as Altaïr, son of Umar, which in Arabic would have been translated as Altaïr ibn Umar. Now, let's take a look at Altaïr's life. Born on January 11th, 1165, to Maud and Umar ibn La'Ahad in Masyaf. While Maud would die in childbirth, Umar would survive until the first siege of Masyaf in August of 1176. Umar's death would come as retribution for killing a nobleman general during his escape after he gave Saladin a warning. Saladin would find Ahmed Sofan as an assassin spy within his camp, and when Saladin publicly threatened Ahmed, Umar would take responsibility for killing the nobleman that resulted in his death. By the end of August, Ahmed would feel so much guilt for the death of Umar that he would infiltrate Altaïr's personal quarters and apologize to him for his weakness, and then commit suicide with a dagger. Altaïr would immediately run to tell Al-Mualim and tell him what happened. Al-Mualim would instruct Altaïr to tell no one, especially Ahmed's son Abbas, to spare him the shame of his father's death. Altaïr and Abbas would actually start training together as an assassin under Al-Mualim, with combat under Master Labib. After noticing Abbas's continued grief over the loss of his father, Altaïr would tell him the truth in an attempt to console him. Abbas would later show his hatred and disdain for Altaïr after a sparring session by trying to kill him, believing that Altaïr said this only to shame him. Both would end up spending a month in confinement, but Al-Mualim would feel that Abbas's offense was the greater and forced him to train another year before he reached the rank of assassin. In 1189, Altaïr would lead the defense of Masyaf against the Knights Templar. This led to the death of the assassin-turned-Templar Haras. During this defense, he'd save Al-Mualim's life, for which Al-Mualim would grant him the rank of Master. After hearing this, Abbas would spit at Altaïr's feet, and Altaïr would sneer in his first true display of arrogance that would define his mid-20s. In 1190, Altaïr would discover the citadel of Alpep. This was under attack by the Templar Lord Basilisk. This would end up leading him to conduct a search for an artifact known as the Chalice. Search would lead him through the cities of Damascus, Jerusalem, Tyre, and Acre. Eventually, Altaïr would find out the Chalice was actually a woman by the name of Ada. His hunt for her would result in the death of multiple Templars, including the Basilisk and the Keeper of the Assassins, Harash, who was a secret Templar spy. After the death of Basilisk, it would take months for Altaïr to find Ada, but when he did, he would find that she was already dead. Heartbroken, he would return to hunt down all of those responsible for her death, though it would end up bringing him no solace. Once he returned to the Assassins, he would start to feel bitter toward the Creed, stemming from his failure to lead a normal life with Ada. His bitterness would really show itself in either June or July of 1191, when Altaïr was sent to retrieve the Templars' treasure from Solomon's temple. His failure here to follow the Creed led to being thrown from the room by Robert de Sab. When giving his report to Al-Mu'alim, one of his companions, Malik as-Sayef, would enter the room and inform them that Altaïr's failure to abide by the Creed resulted in the death of Malik's brother Kadar, but Malik was able to complete the mission, though Robert's Templar force followed him to Masayef. This leads directly into the defense of Masayef, during which Altaïr would show no fear and perform a leap of faith from a guard tower into a pile of hay. Goal here was to have the Crusader army think that the three who jumped to their death actually jumped to their death, though only one of the three who jumped had any injuries, which would have been a broken leg. Altaïr would go on to spring the trap, and from another tower he would crush most of the vanguard under a pile of logs. Directly following the battle, Altaïr would be forced to sleep the sleep of the dead after a public showing of his failure with the tenets of the Creed. After he woke from this, he would be demoted to novice and sent on his task to hunt the Nine. The hunt for the Nine would take place from July to September 1191. During this time, Altaïr would learn more of the Knights Templar and their treasure called the Apple of Eden. He also assassinated notable Templars Tamir, Garnier de Naplouse, Talal, Abu Nukud, William of Montferrat, Majd ad-Din, Sibrand, and Jubayr al-Hakim. During this time, Altaïr's personality would also change, going from one who cared more for himself to one that cared more for the order and was humble when talked about his own personal abilities. The hunt for the Nine would officially come to an end on September 7th, 1191, during the Battle of Arsuf. Altaïr had chased Grand Master of the Templar Order, Robert de Sab, from Jerusalem to the battleground of Arsuf, where King Richard and his crusaders would end up routing Saladin and his forces. After an argument between Altaïr and Robert about who was King Richard's true enemy, the king would say that he would leave it to God to decide and ordered a trial by combat. Altaïr defeated Robert in combat, but after the duel, Robert would tell Altaïr that Al-Mu'alim was secretly a Templar, and now that the Nine were dead, Altaïr would be his next target. Immediately after this revelation, Altaïr would ride for Masayef, where he would find that Al-Mu'alim used the Apple of Eden to control the minds of the assassins within the city. With help from reinforcements led by Malik, Altaïr would take control of the city in a mostly non-lethal fashion. Once he made it to Al-Mu'alim, they would have a duel where Al-Mu'alim would attempt to use the apple to control and confuse Altaïr. Altaïr would see through the tricks and beat Al-Mu'alim, and after killing him, Altaïr would go against assassin tradition and burn his body to make sure that his death was not a trick caused by the apple. Immediately following the burning of Al-Mu'alim's body, Abbas would steal the apple, thinking that Altaïr led a coup against Al-Mu'allim. Taking the apple to a tower, Abbas would be unable to control it, and this would lead to Altaïr climbing the tower to take back the apple and watch Abbas beg for forgiveness. Altaïr would stay true to the creed during this time, and after convincing everyone of Al-Mu'allim's betrayal, he would be named the new mentor or leader of the Levantine assassins. Shortly after his rise to mentor, Altaïr started writing his codex. During this time, he would redesign the hidden blade to not require the removal of the ring finger and to allow it to disperse poison, believing that these things would help the assassins to protect people better than before. In October of 1191, Altaïr would find out that the Templars were now under the lead of Armand Bouchard and that they had fled to Cyprus. Over the next 2 years, he would hunt Bouchard alongside Maria Thorpe, who was Robert de Sab's disgraced squire, eventually leading to Bouchard's death. After the mission to Cyprus, Altaïr would end up falling in love with Maria, who he would marry in 1195 in Limassol. Later that year, they'd give birth to their son Darim, and 2 years later, in 1197, a second son they named Seth, both of whom were born in Masyaf. After the birth of his sons, Altaïr would promote the assassin order by traveling throughout the Middle East, and most of his trip would be a success, except for in 1204, when he went to the city of Constantinople. Here he'd find that the city was besieged by crusaders, and he would return to Masyaf in utter disappointment. After this, though, he'd return to using the apple in what he called short doses with a focused mind. The knowledge that he would learn from the apple would allow him to build his armor out of a lighter but stronger metal, the formula of which he would later erase from history to prevent it from falling into the wrong hands. He would also use this knowledge to redesign the hidden blade again, this time so it would fire small projectiles. Sometime between his rise as mentor to his second redesign of the hidden blade, he would also allow for the members of the Brotherhood to express love for their children, with the belief that love would lead them to be more likely to make the right sacrifices for the right reasons. In 1217, the assassins' expansion would be halted by Genghis Khan's rapid expansion of the Mongol Empire. Altaïr believed that this expansion was because of an artifact like his Apple of Eden. This belief would lead Altaïr to lead Maria and Darim on a mission to assassinate the Khan. On their departure, Altaïr would leave Seth to take care of his wife and 2 daughters, and he would leave the Brotherhood to Malik as a temporary mentor. On August 18th, 1227, they would find the city of Xingping under siege by Mongols. Darim would set up at a vantage point and watch over Altaïr's approach and his escape route. Altaïr would fail in his assassination of Genghis Khan and be injured by a guard. Qualain Gal, who had joined them before reaching Xingping, would help Altaïr back to Darim, and then Qualain and Darim would complete Altaïr's mission. In 1228, Altaïr and his family would return to Masyaf to find that Malik was thrown in prison, with the assassin brotherhood being led by a council that had Abbas at its head. Told that Seth had taken his family to Alamut, and not trusting the situation, Darim would travel there in search of Seth. The day after their return, Altaïr and Maria found out that Seth was actually dead and that it was Malik who performed the act. Altaïr would demand that the brotherhood be returned to him based on the status of the brotherhood. Abbas would deny this demand while being backed by a weak-minded council. Altaïr and Maria would return to their residence and mourn their son Seth. Altaïr would break Malik out of the dungeons, finding him malnourished and unkempt. Malik would then inform Altaïr and Maria that Seth had been murdered 2 years prior in 1226, and that it was on Abbas's order and that he was framed for it. On September 12, 1228, Altaïr and Maria confronted Abbas about the information they got from Malik. Swami, a follower of Abbas's, would give Abbas a burlap sack that Abbas would then give to Altaïr, showing that it contained Malik's head. After a heated exchange, Abbas demanded that the Apple of Eden be given to him in exchange for information on Seth's death. Altaïr agreed, and as Swami went to retrieve it, told Altaïr that just before he killed Seth, that he told Seth it was Altaïr who ordered his execution. Infuriated with this information, Altaïr would use the apple to force Swami to injure himself. When Maria tried to intervene, Swami would end up killing her, and Altaïr used his hidden blade to kill Swami. After contemplating killing everyone with the apple, Altaïr would then flee Masyaf with Darim, who had just returned from Alamut. For the next several years, Altaïr would spend his time grieving the loss of his wife and studying the apple. In his grief, he would force away Seth's wife and children, who would settle in Alexandria, Egypt. When Darim could no longer handle the state of Altaïr's depression and his obsession with the apple, he would spend his time heading to France and England, warning them of the emerging Mongol threats. While studying the apple, Altaïr would design new tactics and medicine and discover that Alamut was built on the remains of an old Isu temple. This temple is where he found the memory seals that he would end up imprinting his most significant genetic memories to. In 1247, Altaïr would leave Alamut and head back to Masyaf, saving a merchant on the way. The merchant would take Altaïr to his home, where his wife and daughter would tend to Altaïr's wounds. After healing, the merchant would tell Altaïr the state of the assassins, who no longer protected the village, but heavily taxed and abused the people. After hearing about this, Altaïr would set an example by living the true ways of the Brotherhood, moderating arguments, presenting new designs to tradesmen, and treating the sick. Eventually, he would travel across the village and notice that he was being followed. And once secluded, he found out that it was Malik's son Tazim al-Sayef. And after Altaïr told Tazim about his plan to return the assassins to their former glory, Tazim would rally assassins that remained loyal to the old ways. These men would work their way to the castle without killing anyone per Altaïr's orders. The castle would be opened by surrendering assassins, and Altaïr would come face to face with Abbas, who would order his men to attack, though Altaïr would kill Abbas with the hidden gun, and this display would cause Abbas's men to surrender. After the death of Abbas and regaining the title of mentor, Altaïr would start construction on a library under Masyaf. He would eventually store thousands of books that contained the knowledge he gained from the apple, and he would use the memory seals that he found in Alamut as the keys to the library. In the early months of 1257, Altaïr would document his life to Niccolo Polo before sending his codex and the library keys out of Masyaf with Niccolo and Maffeo Polo. At the same time, Altaïr would begin to disperse the assassins to build guilds in new countries, saying that the city must be empty when the Mongols arrived. On August 12, 1257, after helping the Polos leave Masyaf during this Mongol siege, Altaïr would head to the library with Darim, and it would be here that Altaïr would tell Darim that the library was meant to hide the apple. As Darim left, Altaïr would take the apple of Eden deep within the library and place it in a safe locked with a sixth memory seal. After locking away the apple, Altaïr would take a seat in the middle of the library and silently pass away at the age of 92. Altaïr's place within history is undeniable. He rebuilt the order on more than one occasion, modified the hidden blade more than once, and even developed new assassination techniques. But he would not have been able to rebuild without first learning the true meaning of the creed, its tenets, and even its ironies. Even within the twilight of his years, he wanted to make sure that the assassins could survive throughout the ages. While I can't deny his place within the lore, I always had an issue playing as Altaïr, his biggest problem of which is that he couldn't swim. And I can understand the storyline that it was because of limitations within the Animus, but it would always seem to make things much more difficult than they needed to be. The same goes from the speed at which he climbed. It was so slow that it made climbing to escape a battle almost impossible, as you would constantly get hit by rocks or arrows. Thank you for your time. Please feel free to subscribe to the podcast, and you can find me on Twitter at visions_AC. Until the next time, my assassin friends, make sure to follow the creed, and to those Templars listening, may the Father of Understanding guide you.